Why is Uyghur so important for China?
Since the Communist Party came to power in 1949, China has been cracking down on the Uyghurs, a Muslim ethnic minority. So what's at stake besides China's national unity? Resources. Uyghurs live in Xinjiang, which has an estimated 1/3 of China's natural gas and oil reserves. And it's rich, really rich, in mineral resources. Xinjiang also produces a lot of cotton, 60% of China's output. And the last major resource? Space. Xinjiang is 1/6 of China's total area, but less than 1% of China's population lives there. Some officials see Xinjiang as part of a solution to China's overcrowding problem.
Its location is very strategic because it sits between much of eastern China and the countries of Central Asia.
一带一路倡议正赋予其独特的优势，使之成为向西开放的核心区和重要窗口。
And Xinjiang is home to about 1/5 of China's total oil reserves. It's also the biggest producer of coal as a region. It's vitally important from an energy security perspective to China. And this explains this kind of obsessive desire for stability in that region at the cost of things like basic individual rights, so as not to upset its economic development plans, both at home and abroad.
Who are the populace of Uyghur? And what is happening to them? What is the condition of general Muslims in China?
In the province of East Turkestan, which is the province that they have called Xinjiang, this is their name. In 1947, the Chinese government basically invaded this province, which was not under Chinese control, and they occupied it, and they acquired it, and they basically made it a part of China. And the people there, they are more Turkish than they are Chinese. They don't speak Mandarin, they don't speak Chinese. Ethnically, they're different. They're not the Hui Muslim. These are what are called the Uyghur Muslims, okay? And the Uyghurs are a branch of the Turkish people. They are not a branch of the Chinese people.
10 million of them live mostly in the Xinjiang region of Western China. Ethnic tensions have risen over the years since 1949 after the communist government encouraged the mass migration of Han Chinese. Uyghurs share ethnic and cultural similarities with their neighbors in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia. China says its crackdown in Xinjiang is to protect peace and prevent what it calls terrorism. There have been ethnic riots in recent years, and Uyghur separatists have been blamed for several attacks, including one in Beijing's Tiananmen Square in 2013.
And the Uyghurs have been humiliated. They have been colonized for the last 60 years. And obviously, push has come to shove, and the Uyghurs are now fighting back. Of course, they have been fighting for the last 67 years, but especially in the last decade, it's just gone beyond that. Because what has happened is essentially the Han government has started sending in hundreds of thousands of Han Chinese to take over all the businesses, to control all the government, to rob the lands of the people. So what do you think the people are going to do? Their land, their livelihood, their education has been stripped away, just like, Israel and Palestine, what's happening there. So what are the Uyghurs going to do? They're doing what any people would do when they have been subdued and humiliated. So when they are now fighting back, the government is saying, oh, Al-Qaeda there, terrorism there, ISIS there, even though they have nothing to do with those movements, right? They have nothing to do. They're fighting for their independence, the Uyghur independence. So as a tactic now, the situation has gone from bad to worse in the last 5 years, and it is now a situation of catastrophe of the highest magnitude. The UN and Amnesty and others have said that this is one of the worst cases of human rights violations since World War II is taking place right now in that province of Xinjiang or East Turkestan, where essentially the government now has taken the Uyghur people as an enemy. And they are attempting to wipe out Uyghur civilization by force. And they're doing this by forcing them to give up their language, their culture, and of course their religion.
Xinjiang's take on social credit is simple and ruthless. Citizens here are not given a score. Instead, they're divided into just 3 categories: trustworthy, average, untrustworthy. If you're Han Chinese, you're deemed trustworthy and granted freedom of movement. But if you're Uyghur, you're average, with restrictions imposed on travel and religious practices.
Islam still plays an important role in the local culture. Beijing realized this and decided to retranslate the Quran to justify its colonization policy. Only the edition of the Quran approved by Beijing is allowed in China.
The Chinese authorities have changed the Quranic surahs to make them compatible with communist principles. In their eyes, our religion must justify their policy. To do this, the Chinese authorities haven't hesitated to change the translation of the Holy Book.
To Uyghur Imam, because he refused to follow the party line, he had to secretly flee China and take refuge in Europe. On Fridays, the holy day, Uyghurs flock to hear the sermon. A sermon approved beforehand by the regime.
Every Friday before prayer, the Imams receive 3 hours of political study from representatives of the Propaganda Bureau. The Imams are obliged to follow the recommendations published by the Islamic Association of China. They also learn the latest local directives, and they are reminded what is forbidden to say.
As for the Imam, if he doesn't comply with Communist Party rules, he immediately loses his job, has to pay back 5 years' wages, and ends up in prison.
And the ruling Communist Party has banned a host of Islamic practices.
The whole of Islam is forbidden to those under 18 and members of the Communist Party. This child and his father are turned away. They've been spotted by the security services.
Now, authorities in Xinjiang have posted a range of restrictions on official websites. Among them, students, teachers, civil servants and retired officials are barred from fasting. The rules also require men to shave off beards and women to remove veils. One town requires local officials to check on mosques at least twice a week during the month.
Only old men are allowed to wear a beard. The Uyghurs feel they're victims of the beauty project. The Chinese authorities have just invented the first apartheid based on aesthetic and religious criteria.
The Chinese government has long treated the Turkic Muslim population of Xinjiang with disdain and hostility. It considers their distinct identity, their religion, their culture, their language, as evidence of political disloyalty, of separatism. And since the new party secretary, Chen Chuanguo, came to power in the region 2 years ago, the authorities have stepped up their Strike Hard campaign, which is designed on paper to eradicate terrorist threats, but in reality is being used to justify massive abuses across the region, including the establishment of political education camps in which people are forced to swear their loyalty to the party and the government.
They started cracking down on religion. They began detaining those wearing hijabs, or those covering their faces.
China's rulers have struggled to control the region and its people for 2 millennia. Surveillance technology is the new weapon in their campaign.
ID cards loaded with personal details are used to track people's movements. Authorities use artificial intelligence that can alert them if someone in a video is walking too fast or parked in the wrong spot. The system also tracks faces. An immense network of security cameras, some equipped with facial recognition, is constantly monitoring the streets. Systems are also used to match people with their ID cards, everywhere from shopping malls to gas stations.
Things like police checkpoints every few hundred meters, forcible checking of people's mobile phone devices, of their laptops, as well as surveillance by things like iris scans, facial recognition cameras, and DNA checks. There's no charges, no trial. People just sort of disappear into these places for many months at a time and even longer.
Mass incarceration, the likes of which has not been seen since Nazi Germany. This is what the UN has said. The likes of which has not been seen since Nazi Germany. Not thousands, not tens of thousands. It is said hundreds of thousands of people have been rounded up at will and taken into concentration camps. Right now, as we speak, where They are forced to be indoctrinated into the Han culture, Mandarin language, forced to eat pork, forced to not pray, basically cannot live their lives as Muslims. So our brother here, he is from the Xinjiang province, and what he has told us is that they have forcibly taken the DNA of basically all of the Uyghur population, and in every household at least one person is in the concentration camp. And of course that is like the threat, obviously, understand, it's going to keep them in control. You know, may Allah protect. Imagine if one of your children were taken, what are you going to do for the rest of them? You know, so that's the psychology. As I said, even Amnesty has said this is the worst travesty of human rights since Nazi Germany, right? This is what they themselves are saying.
You have many Uyghurs who are saying that they're simply being called in because they exchanged text messages or shared an email several years ago that contained religious content, and now they're being called into a re-education camp or being questioned at a detention camp for that. It's very small action. You can wander around some of the residential neighborhoods where Uyghur communities were once concentrated and find them to be completely deserted.
A family member from every family was imprisoned for no reason. It has been 8 months since I last saw my son or heard his voice. What's more, they put my 13-year-old daughter in a political education camp.
In August this year, the UN announced it had seen credible reports that over 1 million Uyghurs are currently held without charge in camps in Xinjiang, purely because of their ethnicity.
Officially, the state denies their existence, but China cannot airbrush these satellite images because they were shot from space. They appear to show a camp system built to lock up perhaps 1 in 10 of the Uyghur minority.
We are looking at systematic, long-term indoctrination. People are having to renounce many tenets of their religion, even of their culture. They have to engage in self-criticisms. They have to memorize party slogans. They have to sing songs of thanks to Xi Jinping. So if that is not brainwashing, then what is?
I was taken in. When I entered, there's barbed wire. I have not seen a jail in my life. But when I went in, it felt like a jail. The guards were armed and had electric buttons. The first 2 days, they put me on the iron chair 24 hours a day. They didn't let me lie down. I was sitting up the whole time. My hands were just like this. The manacles were right there on my wrists. I couldn't move my hands. The shackles were on my feet. The iron from the lock pressed down on my skin. We were in a small, 3 by 3 meter room, with a thin mat on the floor. 15 of us slept on it. 15 people. If we lay on our backs, we wouldn't fit. 15 people with manacles on our feet. 2 people using 1 blanket and lying back to back. I almost forgot about the singing. Before breakfast, we'd sing. We'd sing one of the songs, such as, "Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China." Then, we could eat. Everything they taught us was to denounce our religion. We heard noises, the sound of yelling, kicking, and beatings, the sound of suffering. We also experienced the suffering ourselves. But when you hear it like this, we looked at each other in sorrow. The beatings happened every day. Some days, Chinese officials on duty would come drunk. They would take inmates from 1 or 2 cells and start to beat them, just for the fun of it. They would make inmates scream in pain. The acoustic in the hallways made the sound of the screams unbearable. They just did it to amuse themselves. For the first time in my life, I wished I was dead.
We documented torture. We documented ill treatment. Several of our interviewees told us they were so despondent at how they were being treated and that they had no way of knowing how long they would be there, that they had contemplated suicide. The only way back out of these facilities is to show the guards or satisfy the guards that you're sufficiently politically loyal to the government and the party.
Chinese authorities weren't just targeting adults. Her children were apparently taken to this orphanage. She hasn't heard from them since.
After I got the news, I was so upset. I want them to grow up with me. Every time I think of them, I think of the things that have happened. I feel horrible. There isn't a day when I haven't cried.
Internment camps are associated with some of the worst episodes in human history. It's striking to think that this kind of mass incarceration of a religious minority might be happening again in 2018.
And then the issue that we're now hearing, which is again mind-boggling, and that is that the people that are killed, or maybe even intentionally killed, we don't know, their organs are now being harvested and sold. Our Muslim brothers and sisters, their organs are being now sold, and if anybody needs an organ in amongst the Han population, they will be getting it from, it's like unbelievable the stories that are being heard. And these are, again, it's complete undercover in the sense that there's no media allowed there, but these are all the people that managed to come out. This is what they're saying. Those that are not taken to the concentration camps, within the Uyghur population, the Han Chinese are now living amongst them. They say we are guests. They'll walk into your house, they say we are a guest. What does that mean? You're a government agent and you have the right to occupy the house and live in it at the expense of the host Uyghur, and they're going to monitor that you're not praying, you're not reading Quran, you're not doing anything Islamic. This is like the Inquisition, if you know what happened. This is like the Inquisition, when the Catholics would send people to monitor. So the Han government is now doing this to the Uyghur population. Recently, there was an article where Muslimas are being forced to marry Han Chinese. Any Chinese person, Han, any Han I should say, not any Han person can say, I want a bride. And the local government there, the Uyghur government, which is Han government, will literally hand one of our sisters over and forcibly marry to this man. A'udhu billah. And nothing can be done. This is a forcible marriage where the goal being to eradicate her identity. Her children are going to be Han. She's no longer a Muslimah. And then, of course, last week there was an article where sisters who have long skirts, they're being stopped and their skirts are being cut in public so that they become mini skirts that you're not allowed to wear. Forget hijab, because hijab was banned last year. Hijab was banned last year. Quran was banned last year. Ramadan was banned last year. 2 years. They have no fasting. You're not allowed to fast. In the broad daylight, there is a table of food in Ramadan. And the Uyghurs are forced to have free lunch on the government. What does that mean? If you don't eat, you will be whipped, killed, tortured, taken away. Everybody is forced to eat. They have been disconnected from the rest of the world. They were only allowed to go for Hajj since 1979. You know, before that point in time, the communist government would not even allow them to go for Hajj. So it's only been since 1980, basically, where there's been a little bit of leeway with a lot of conditions. You can go for Hajj, with some conditions you can go. So it's still kind of sort of controlled climate. What can be done other than this? So the Uyghurs' passports and identity cards has been taken, and they cannot travel. Yes, this is also true. So when they want to flee, they cannot flee. They cannot flee because they don't have identity cards, they don't have passports. So it is a mass, basically, human rights murder. This is a war crime, essentially. This is exactly what's going on right now. So what is happening right now is a persecution the likes of which we have not seen since World War II. And the government is silent, as you know, and the local and the world is silent. This is the reality, unfortunately. The ummah, unfortunately, wallahu musta'an. So the least we can do is to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our own blessings and to make sure that we do whatever we can to help them out in our du'as, in our prayers, in our public awareness. I don't think we can even give money to them at this stage because the government has blocked off everything. We could not go there physically, obviously. It would not even be safe for us to go. But we did meet some of them in other cities. And if they happen to meet other cities, then they're monitored, but they're allowed to pray in those cities. So it's really that province where Islam is being clamped down upon. No Jumu'ah, no Ramadan, no hijab, no Quran. That province, the Xinjiang province. As for the other cities, as I said, if you do a government-controlled, sanitized version of Islam, then you're allowed to eke out an existence over there. For the last 70 years, as you know, the government has been a communist government, very different now. 1949, when they made the country the modern communist country of China. And what this has done is that it has caused the government to be controlling every aspect of a citizen's life, including the religious aspect. So, what the government has done is essentially taken charge of the mosques completely. We're talking about the cities we went to, which is Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, and other, the main cities. We didn't go up north where the Xinjiang province. What this means is that in the government, the only mosques have to have licenses. You have to be government approved. And the government appoints the imams. And the government trains the imams. So one thing that really, frankly, very much hurt me at the personal level of having studied in Medina for 10 years and having had many Chinese friends. When I was in Medina, there were hundreds of Chinese students. And I didn't meet a single one of them. None of the graduates of Medina were employed by the government, obviously. Who is employed by the government? Only those who graduate from the madrasa that's operated by the government. None of the imams I met even spoke Arabic, and they're graduates of madrasas. None of them I met was even a hafidh of the Quran, and this really hurt me. Some had memorized 2 juz, some had memorized 4 juz. None of them could recite the Quran with the tajweed that we are accustomed to. So much so that one of our innocent brothers came up to me and he goes, "Which qira'ah are they reciting in?" And I said, "It's not a qira'ah. It's just they don't have the tajweed that we do. They are cut off from..." Now, there are Chinese Muslims that have graduated from Azhar, that have graduated from Medina, from other places, but they are not active. They are suppressed. They are not put to give khutbahs and durus. We went to the mosque of Xi'an, which is the largest mosque, again, the Tang Dynasty emperor, right? It's a massive complex. We went to this grand mosque of Xi'an. There's 3 or 4 imams there. We met with them in broken Arabic, and we communicated and whatnot. One of them had studied in Medina for a year or 2. Just the Arabic level. Then he came back, and then he didn't actually graduate and whatnot. Then he went through the system, and then he was appointed. So he was the one I could speak with in broken Arabic a little bit. And honestly, it was a very painful interview. We interviewed him with all of our group, and it was just a painful interview because every second sentence was, "We thank the Chinese government. We thank the Chinese government. We thank the Chinese government." He said it so often that we got the point. He has to say this. He has to praise every second, third. Any question we ask, bring it back down, and then, Alhamdulillah, the Chinese government has been great to us. Like, no matter what question you ask, the third sentence has to be praised to the government, right? So much so, we asked him a point-blank question. Can you give da'wah to the non-Muslims? Okay? Look at how he flipped it around. Wallahi, genius, huh? Alhamdulillah, the Chinese government has given us full freedom to speak about Islam to anybody who comes here. That was a switcheroo. You get the point here, right? Alhamdulillah, the Chinese government has given us the full freedom. He said it, al-hurriya at-tamma. He said it, the full freedom to preach Islam, then added here, to anybody who comes right here. Okay? He's not allowed to give one pamphlet outside. He's not allowed to say anything to anyone. If somebody, for some bizarre reason, wants to walk into the masjid, right, then the imam is free to talk whatever they want, okay? This is the largest mosque in all of China, Xi'an Masjid, the largest mosque. I said, this is my question to him after years, I said, do you have any duruz or halaqat for the Muslims? For the Muslims, do you have hadith class, tafsir class? Once again, Alhamdulillah, we have the full freedom to teach Islam in my house. Not in the masjid. Not a single halaqah in the masjid. Wallahi, my mind just like blanked out. You cannot even have a halaqah to teach your fellow Muslims about Islam. So what do you expect then of the level of practicing? Islam in China. Islam has been in China since the first generation of the Hijrah, the first century of the Hijrah. within the generation of the Tabi'un, i.e. the early Umayyads, groups of merchants, they reached what is now the area of Hong Kong. And this is the coastal areas, right? And they set up camp over there to spread their business, their trade. And this is one of the amazing things. And in fact, many countries are examples of this, is the spread of Islam via merchants, via businessmen, via people who would just go to buy and sell merchandise. That's it. They're going as traders. And the locals become so impressed with their akhlaq, their honesty, their manners. They become intrigued. And slowly but surely, Islam begins to spread in these countries. Some of the most amazing examples of these lands are now the majority countries, the largest Muslim countries in the world. Not a single army ever went to them. So China is of those lands where there was never a majority, there is still not a majority. However, there is a sizable minority of Muslims, and they came there not by the sword, not by armies, but by early Muslims who went there. And the first mosque that was founded in China was founded within the 1st century of the Hijrah, i.e. less than 50, 60 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Islam reached the shores of China. And that masjid is still standing, not obviously the physical structure, but the location. Now, China at the time, as with most other countries, and our countries of our times, was composed of many small dynasties, kingdoms, okay? And so, when it was found out that there's this one place that's allowing Muslim merchants, Arab merchants, these merchants are bringing in good, they're bringing in stuff that is not found anywhere else. Another major kingdom, one of the largest kingdoms of that region, called the Tang dynasty, T-A-N-G, like the drink Tang, called the Tang dynasty. They were the first dynasty to officially allow Muslims to come and settle. They wanted Muslims to come. This is roughly in the year maybe 690 to 700 CE, i.e. 50, 60, 70 Hijrah, very early Hijrah. Okay, so Islam has now reached the Tang dynasty, and the emperor gave an official license for Arab and Muslim merchants to come and establish a base in that province, in that place. And the Arabs that came there, obviously, they opened up a door of a channel of merchandise, an avenue of merchandise that no other group had. And the city or the capital of the Tang dynasty is now called Xi'an, X-I-A-N. X-I-A-N, Xi'an. And the city of Xi'an, not coincidentally, it is the first city in the famous Silk Road. You guys know the Silk Road, right? Xi'an is where it begins, and it ends past Damascus. So they said, we want to get merchandise right at the source that nobody else can get. So they opened the door for Muslims to come, and the Muslims, of course, they wherever they went, they showed their honesty, they showed their character. When the time for Salah would come, the people would basically close their shops and pray in the road. And other people complained, what are these guys doing? They're stopping merchandise, buying and selling. They are, clogging up the system, the streets. So it reached the emperor that these people are, when it's every time of the day, when it's Dhuhr time, Asr time, they have their weird customs. They stop the bazaar that they have. They have a bazaar there. Everything closes, and it's clogging the alleyways. So the emperor visited them, the emperor of the Tang dynasty, and he asked them what is going on. So they explained that when it is time for Salah, we need to stop everything, we need to pray. And he saw them in their prayers, and he was so impressed and moved. He didn't embrace Islam, but he did the next best thing. He gifted them a large area of land, and he financed the construction of the masjid. That masjid is still standing to this day. Portions of it are original, 1,200 something years old. There was a masjid, as he said, in the city of Guangzhou that the Muslims themselves built. This is a masjid the emperor built. So Xi'an is basically the kernel where Islam was planted by the blessings basically of the governor or the emperor himself. As we said, it's the second city. There is a city smaller than that, but this is where the main city comes. And of course, where the Arab merchants came, they established a hub. They intermarried. They began, preaching and teaching. So very simplistically, it is said that the descendants of that group are now what is called the Hui Muslim, H-U-I, okay, H-U-I. Now, before we move on, you should know one thing about China. China is a very interesting country in many ways. Of the ways that China is unique, the government of China has officially designated 56 ethnic groups as being Chinese. If you're not a part of these 56, you can't be a part of the Chinese mainstream, basically, okay? There are 56 ethnic groups that are officially sanctioned or blessed, or basically you are basically a part of the Chinese system if you're one of these ethnicities, okay? And 10 of them are predominantly Muslim. 10 are predominantly Muslim. There's one of these 56 that is the dominant of all the country of China. So much so they eclipse all of the other 53. The Han Chinese. The Han Chinese are the dominant Chinese. 9 out of 10 people of that region are Han. And Han have their cuisine, their language, their ethnicity. Mandarin is from the Han. So the Han Chinese are the dominant Chinese. That's the 90%. And obviously they're the ones in control, the government. You understand this, okay? All the 53 put together are less than 10%, okay? And the Han, by and large, are not Muslim, okay? They are the mainstream that you know. The Hui, H-U-I, are one of those 56 of those entities, okay? One of them. And the Hui, it is said, very simplistically, that they are basically the descendants of the original Muslims that came, and their da'wah and their intermarriage and their children. So basically they go back a long time. And for practical purposes, I'm an outsider, I cannot speak on behalf of the insider. As an outsider, the Hui Muslim and the Han Chinese, they look the same, they speak the same language. You know, you cannot really tell them apart per se. Okay, maybe the insiders can, I don't know, but me as an outsider, they're exactly the same. You cannot really tell them apart, and that's because they are really a part of the culture. The Hui, they speak Mandarin. They are a part of the mainstream, but they are Muslim, and they're given a different ethnicity. There were times and places where Islam was given official sanction. There were times and places where not just Islam, but other religions, such as Christianity and Judaism, were kind of persecuted. This is the way it was. By and large, Islam was always allowed to be practiced and flourish within the parameters of the mainstream government laws. And there are a number of times where Chinese Muslims played a heroic role, and the Chinese government acknowledged that role. And of them is in 1949, World War II, when the Japanese and the Chinese were at war with one another. The Hui Muslims were at the forefront defending their land, the China mainland, and their culture and their civilization against the Japanese invasion. And there were specific army contingents, army movements, or you can say entire basically deployments that were Hui Muslim. The Muslims there, and they fought a brave battle. And this is one of the reasons as well that by and large the Hui Chinese are considered to be part of the fabric of China, because they have shed their blood, they have lived amongst the people, they are amongst the people over there. This is the Hui. How many Muslims are in China? Nobody knows, because the census is not allowed to ask about religion. Nobody knows. You hear figures from 40 million to 100 million. Okay, you hear figures from 40 million to 100 million. You hear all of these figures, okay? Even if it's 40 million, subhanAllah, that's a lot of Muslims. We saw the Chinese Muslims, subhanAllah, they had this unique blend of Islam and China. They had this unique blend in their colors and their clothing and their cuisine. Wherever we went, there was a slightly different cuisine. So by the way, all of these, Sichuan and Hunan and all that, when you go Chinese American, right? These are provinces of China. They actually are. And their cuisine is different. And there are Muslim cuisines as well. And wherever we went, we made a point to go to the halal restaurants of those local Muslims, and there are different cuisines. Each locality had a different Chinese flavor. The point I wanted to stress here is that Chinese Muslims, when you enter their mosques, when you hear them, when you see them, you can see China and you can see Islam. It's a unique blend. They have a unique calligraphy. It is called Sino-Arabic, Chinese Arabic calligraphy. We went to Xi'an and we saw it everywhere. It is the style of Islamic China. And it is a unique calligraphy that outwardly looks a little bit Chinese, but when you look at it, it's actually Arabic. The first mosque we visited was the one in Beijing. We saw a dragon on the outside. Then we went to Xi'an, which is one of the first mosques of China. And the oldest pillar there has a dragon inscribed on it. The dragon, in that time and place, was the emperor's seal. Nobody is allowed to use a dragon other than the emperor. Nobody, by penalty of death. Nowadays you can buy a dragon anywhere, and back then only the emperor, the symbol is the dragon. So if you see the dragon symbol outside any property, what does that mean? The emperor is telling you, you had better not mess with this property. It is the protection of the emperor that has been given to the Muslims of China. Now you tell me, would you not take that? Mob mentality, this and that. That's the respect that those Muslims had in the eyes of the emperors.
Like, share, and subscribe to create awareness. We are also available on Facebook, Google+, Twitter, and Paltalk.